Hey everybody, this is Andres from Board Gamify, and today I'm going to be talking about Radlands. Radlands by Roxley Games is a two-player competitive card game where each player is going to be trying to take out all three of their opponent's camps before they can take out theirs. So before I get into the review and my opinions on the game, let's go ahead and dive in to see how the game works and what a typical turn will look like. So if you look down here, what you're looking at is actually the deluxe version of the game. So the deluxe version of the game comes in the box that you see here to my right, and the only difference is that the deluxe version will come with a player mat for each player as well as these upgraded tokens. The base game will come in a box like this to my left, and everything else will be in this box. It'll come with cardboard punch out of these tokens, and obviously no playmats. So what you're looking at here is just a game that's been set up. You'll have your three camps at the bottom that you're attempting to defend from your opponent, the slots above each camp where you can play people, the column for event cards, your water tokens, which is the resource in this game, and your two ever-present cards. So each player will have identical copies of these cards that they'll have throughout the game, and as they play them, they'll return here to be continually used in future turns. There's also a shared deck that both players are going to be drawing and playing cards from. So once you're set up, the way a typical turn will look is you'll progress. The first thing you'll do is progress event cards up one step, and I'll touch a little bit more on that once I explain the different types of cards in the game. Then you'll gain your 3 water for the turn and draw a card. Now, once you've done that, you have a few options as far as actions you can perform on your turn. The first is playing cards from your hand. You can play as many cards from your hand as you'd like, as long as you have the water to pay for them. And there are 2 types of cards in the deck. There are people that you're going to be playing in the columns above your camp. And there are event cards. Event cards, like I mentioned, will be played in this column over here, and they'll always have a number which indicates how many turns they're going to take to activate. So this one will go into the second slot, and each turn you'll progress this up until eventually they pop off, at which point you'll resolve the effect of the card and put it into a shared discard pile. Characters, on the other hand, like I mentioned, will be placed in the various columns above the camp. You'll place a water on the character to indicate that you just played it this turn, and the reason that's important is because character abilities can't be used until the turn after that they've been played. So characters themselves, once placed above a camp, act as a shield for that camp. So if my opponent were attempting to damage this camp that I've got here in the middle, they'd have to get through this character first. Likewise, if I played an additional character here, they would have to get through this one before getting here, before getting here. So placement of your cards plays a lot into the strategy of the game. One of the other things you can do is activate your camp's abilities. Some camps have 2 abilities, which you'll just have to choose which one you want to use, and same thing, you'll place the water tokens indicating that you're activating that camp, because each ability activation of a camp or a person can only be done once per turn. Other options are you can always spend 2 water to draw a card from the shared deck, or you can use the 2 ever-present cards that I mentioned earlier. Raiders is just a raid card that damages an opponent's base of their choice, and there's also the water silo. Now the water silo plays a key role because you spend 1 water to place the water silo into your hand, and essentially what the water silo does is just provide you with a temporary water when you discard it, putting it back here. So it essentially allows you to reserve a water for future turns. And the reason this is important is because each turn you're only going to have 3 water to work with. But you'll notice as you play the game, some cards cost more than 3 water. So to do that, you'll have to save the water silo to play them on a future turn for 4 water. The other way to get abilities is by discarding cards for their junk effect. So all of the cards in this game are multi-use. So you can always discard them for their junk effect, which is shown on the top left of the card. So in this example, he would give me a temporary water for the turn. So those are the 2 ways to gain extra water in the game. As you're playing through the game, characters may become damaged. you just tap them sideways to signify that they've been damaged. Tapped characters cannot activate their abilities, so it's a good way of preventing your opponent from activating strong characters that they've played. If a character becomes damaged again while they've been tapped, they are discarded and removed from the game. Likewise with camps, they also get damaged and tapped. The difference here is tapped camps can still have their abilities activated. Then once a camp is damaged again, it'll be flipped over and destroyed. Once you've spent all of your water for the turn, or you just choose to not take any more actions, the play passes to your opponent, at which point they'll follow the same turn structure, and play will continue until all of one player's camps have been destroyed. So now that we know how the game works, let's talk about the components. So like I mentioned earlier, this is the deluxe version of the game. So to quickly comment on those two parts, the playmats are really nice. They've got stitched edging, really nice printing, and the upgraded water tokens are really nice as well. They have a really nice feel to them, make a nice clinky sound, as opposed to the cardboard punch-outs in the base game. Obviously these are luxury components, but they do add enjoyability to the game. Outside of that, the card quality is very nice. They're like plastic cards that shuffle really well, and I haven't even felt the need to sleeve these. I've played the game quite a bit and haven't noticed any wear and tear on the cards, so really high quality there. Nothing to complain about. The rule book sets you up pretty quickly, and this player aid card gets you the rest of the way. This is super useful when teaching somebody, because it's got the turn sequence on one side with some tips, as well as the back side with all of the iconography explaining what each of those means. Moving on to replayability. So the game definitely has a good level of replayability, but surprisingly it does not come from this deck of cards, which you might assume. It comes from this stack of 34 bases that are available each time you play the game. So the first time you play, there's a recommended 6 camps that they ask you to play with, just to get used to the game and familiar with the way the abilities work. After that, you can play with these bases in any combination you want, and you can switch up the way the players get their camps. You can give each player 6 camps at the beginning of the game, have them choose 3, and those are the ones they play with. You can draft the camps, and each camp is unique with varying abilities and really strong abilities as well. So the vast majority of the replayability in this game comes from the camps. The main deck itself is actually just 2 copies of each person and each event, with a handful of unique people that there's only 1 copy of. So after 3, maybe even 2 games, you'll have seen most of the cards in this deck. But I actually think that was a pretty good decision on the designer's part. And let me explain why. So when all of the variability is coming from the camps and the replayability is coming from the camps, it allows you to let those drive your tactics and your strategy in the game, knowing what cards are available in the deck. Whereas if this deck were larger or had a wider variety of types of cards, it would increase the randomness and some of the luck in the game. So I'm actually glad they went this way and left the variability and replayability on the camps side. So moving on to likes and dislikes. I really like the multi-use cards. It's one of my favorite mechanics in the game. It really mitigates some bad draws that you may have, but it also lends itself to tactics. You can junk a bunch of cards on your first turn, demolishing your opponent's characters and maybe even damaging one of their camps, but it's going to leave you with less cards in your hand for future turns. So it really adds to that strategy in the game. The player aid is another big positive for me. I really wish more games had player aids like this, because it makes teaching the game so much easier. And then lastly, like I mentioned, the variability and variety in the camps deck. I really enjoyed that. As far as dislikes, there really isn't many. I think if I had to pick something, it would be the the rulebook not identifying some unique situations that can arise with card interactions. But that's kind of to be expected with as many cards are in the game. You know, it would be impossible for them to include all of that in this small rulebook. They cover a good amount of them. They have an index in the back that does detail specific cards and gives further explanation. But there were a few times where I played this game and we just kind of had to make our best guess as to what was the correct way to proceed. But yeah, that's really the only negative I can think of for this game. There is one other thing I wanted to mention that's not really a negative or a positive, but something worth mentioning because I think a lot of people take this into consideration when picking a new game. It is very much a game that's going to take a few plays to get comfortable and good at. And that kind of leads into the idea that when you play against somebody who knows this game, you're probably going to lose. And a lot of that has to do with this shared deck. Knowing what cards are in there, how many of each card of those are in there, what your opponent might have, which tells you what to hold back and what to play, gives that player a huge advantage. But like I said, you do see quite a few of these cards in every game. So if you're willing to put in those 2, maybe 3 games to get comfortable with the deck and really know what's in here, it's a non-issue, but I figured it was worth mentioning. So overall, if you haven't noticed already, I really like this game. I think it's a fantastic 2-player game. It's really quick to play. Most games I've played have ended in 30, maybe 45 minutes if it was a real back and forth. So it really hits the table often and allows you to get a few plays in really quickly. Yeah, overall, really like the game. Highly recommend it. If you guys enjoyed this review or you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll talk to you next time.